And just to know, I sent the link with my last email to all of you. If you didn't get it, let me know. The link to the Or Hamid page where all the recordings, except for the first class, all the recordings of the other classes are there. So if you missed something or you want to hear what Rabbi has to say again, feel free to go to that page and all the classes are there. If you have trouble finding that again, let me know or let Rabbi know and we'll get you back on track.
Okay, then. And I want to add, as you find in the printed editions of sheets and things like that, but also to give our thanks to the Jewish Federation of the Desert, who has made a lot of this preparation research on my part possible, for sponsoring this to just remind us this is text study, it's Bible study, different for Jews than it is for Christians, but we're doing the same thing. But our overall goal is to promote ongoing exchange of ideas and trying to present a different aspect of these texts than perhaps they were read. And that goes for both Jews and Christians. If Christians saw this and maybe did not see in the past how problematic this might be for Jewish-Christian relationships or Christian relationships with other religions as well, that's one thing that we want to kind of raise up. The other one is from a Jewish point of view. Perhaps we saw or we heard about these texts and we said, "Oh, those look what they're doing. They're anti-Semites, the grumbling," and we want to put that into context as well. And as we did in the previous meetings, we'll try to provide a way back again from the holiness that went to hatred and back again. Although it may take a different form today, it may go according to every section. So thank you to Pastor Jane for being willing to do this and all of you for being here. And that's just in case we finish really quickly and I don't have time for thank yous. Okay.
Can I just say one other quick little announcement?
Sure.
I just want to invite everybody, if you, for those of you not in our congregation, or maybe you are, and you may already know this, that kind of a quasi-social arm of Mohammed Bar is the Havara of the Desert, and they are sponsoring a Seder, a really fun Seder next Saturday. And in fact, I'm going to just in the chat section, I'm going to put I'm hoping I can put, I don't know how to do that.
Okay, let's get to the text. If you can do it fine, but that's, people can find,
they'll find it all. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, then. This is something I had meant to show you last week, but and I said if you look up in the thesaurus, for those of you that didn't do your homework, here is at least one example from one particular thesaurus.com. And I love the way they have the different colors, like on a map of temperatures as well, from hot to kind of hot to mild. And I don't see, other than perhaps actor, which almost everything else here really can't be understood in and I don't even know what a mountebank is, but a smoothie, I like that one, a smoothie. The smoothie I like because that's what, according to many scholars in the Qumran community, called the Pharisees Dorshei Chalakot, the ones who sermonize in smooth things. They speak smooth tongues, or wolf in sheep's clothing. So, and this is what we're up against, folks. We're up against this. I mean, if this what comes up on a thesaurus online right now, this is not a book from 100 years ago. Yes, it's taking meanings and literature from many hundreds of years in English. But this is a 21st century edition, and this is what we have for the word Pharisee. And so I think it still is, in some ways, problematic or challenging. And this is for the young at heart. I guess this is something, I don't know if you're familiar with this particular series, but I couldn't find our friend from Tempe, Arizona on this one. But instead I found this, and then this will take 5-6 minutes, and then we'll take a pause to talk about it. Actually, 7 minutes.
Hi there. Today, I'm taking you 2,000 years back in time. I want to tell you another story about the biggest hero in the whole Bible, Jesus. He is God's own son and our Savior. In this episode, you'll see why some people really didn't like what Jesus did. It happened when Jesus was in Jerusalem celebrating a big Jewish holiday. Maybe you remember from last time when Jesus healed a crippled man, that some of the Pharisees didn't like the fact that the healed man was carrying his mat on the Sabbath. They became angry because this was the day of rest, and people were not supposed to do any work, such as healing or carrying things. At least, that's what the Pharisees thought.
Hello. We're just curious to know, who did the work of healing for you?
Well, actually, I have no idea who that man was. He was gone so quick. I didn't even get a chance to thank him. But he sure did a fine job.
Later, the cripple met Jesus at the temple.
Well, thank you so much.
Right away, he went to the Pharisees and told them who Jesus was.
Jesus! His name was Jesus!
He probably thought that they wanted to work together with Jesus to help more people. But that wasn't really what the Pharisees had in mind.
I have heard about that man before. A man walking round, healing people, and then making them believe him.
Can you imagine breaking the holy law by working on the day of rest? Indeed, but the biggest problem is his threat to our fine council of Pharisees.
We are going to find him, and we are going to get him killed. Somehow.
At that time, Pharisees were very important and powerful men. Their job was to protect the law of God given to Moses many years before. But Jesus thought completely different of the Pharisees.
They are hypocrites, den of vipers. I know them, and I know that they do not have the love of God within them.
The Pharisees were supposed to know everything about God. But the way they were treating the people of Israel was completely different from what God had said. They were certainly not holy and pure. Jesus was not afraid of the Pharisees. He knew that it still wasn't time for them to catch him. So instead, he kept talking to the people to spread the word of God.
Everyone who hears my message and has faith in the one who sent me has eternal life. The scriptures tell about me, but you refuse to come to me for eternal life. I don't care about human praise, but I do know that none of you love God.
Who does he think that he is? People must not believe his words.
Well, some of the things he says might be true. Nonsense. He has no right to say such things.
I have come with my Father's authority, and you have not welcomed me. But you will welcome people who come on their own. How could you possibly believe? You like to have your friends praise you, and you don't care about praise that the only God can give.
Oh, we are leaving.
This wasn't the last time Jesus and the Pharisees met. The evil plans and hypocrisy of the Pharisees only made things worse for themselves because God was not with them. They pretended to be good and holy men, when in fact, they were just fake and jealous. In the meantime, Jesus spent his time spreading the true gospel of God because he knew God was watching over him. It gave people hope, completely opposite of what the Pharisees did. So, you see, Jesus is trying to teach us an important lesson here. Hypocrisy, trying to look better than I really am, is only hurting myself. We have to be honest and true. God can see everything in our hearts, and he loves to see a pure heart. So, thanks for following along with this story, and we'll see each other again in another episode of Bible Heroes of Faith. See ya!
Okay. It'd be interesting to know which came first, Game of Thrones or this film. There seems to be a little bit of connection between them, but
I don't know. I kept thinking of Charlie Brown, like all the grown up, the teacher and Charlie Brown, like womp 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 womp. That's the way they.
The grumbling and the British accents. But why don't we open it up? What do people see? What do they hear on both sides of the room, so to speak? No one? Yes, please go ahead, Steve.
I felt like it was very relevant to the current political situations today. You have a bunch of people that think that they know everything and trying to control everybody else and say what's right or that they're on God's side. And I feel like they're not really. So I think we got a lot of Pharisees right now in government.
Okay.
It just related to me. It just felt like I was watching. Nothing's changed. The same stuff that we're dealing with then, we're dealing with now. That's what I got out of it.
Go ahead, Gary. Need you to unmute first.
One of the things that I've learned through my life is, in the hard way, is that it's much easier to sell yourself than attack other people to get ahead. And all you heard was attack. It's not that I'm good. It's you're not good, and you don't gain. You're not gaining anything in terms of your own integrity, your own message. So.
Okay. Others? Please go ahead, Patty. Need you to unmute first.
Okay, I've lost the picture, but I'm not sure if Gary was saying that. Can you hear me?
Yes.
That Christ was putting him down. I think what Jane has been teaching us is the message was that this system has gotten disharmonic. The people who were supposed to be taking care of the poor and showing compassion were really not doing that, and they were hypocrites in the sense that they were collecting the money and not giving the favors they were supposed to. So he was calling them on the carpet, so to speak, for the wrong they were doing. And they, of course, didn't like that. Any institution where it gets top heavy and they start sifting off the funds, whatever that word is, they don't like it when they're called on it. And the messenger is usually shot.
Yes, please go ahead, Megan.
My first reaction was, it's a cartoon, and yikes. If children are watching this as a present-day Bible story, it's so weighted on the side of it's like the flames coming up from the Pharisees, and the Pharisees it's hell, it's this, it's that, which from what I've learned, and in the session I was in last week, as you say, that Jesus was probably a Pharisee. He wasn't a cartoon character who brought everybody to it hit me really. Sorry to anybody who liked it. So
I think that's
a message.
Yeah, so let's just be clear. This is made for kids. This is not made for adults. It's not shown, maybe it is shown in seminaries, but probably as an example of pedagogical materials. I would like to think of pedagogical materials which are maybe you should stay away from. I would say this as a rabbi. Let me put it in these terms. If the characters, instead of having beards and grumbling, were dark-skinned people, I think a lot of people would be absolutely enraged by this. Now, I'm not saying I'm not enraged by this, but I do see it. I personally, as a rabbi, see this as a very problematic educational media piece of pedagogy, because it promotes first of all, it's all the Pharisees. Even though there's only 3 there, it's all of the Pharisees. It's not there's no distinction made. That's the kind of distinction we're trying to make here. I'll also say that I don't know what was. In other words, some of you have talked about, well, that's not the way it really was. We don't know what really was. What we do know is what stories tell us and what we try to read and how we feel. And I would argue that when we look at for instance, when we look at chapter 12 today, and even looking what Jesus did in 23, in Matthew 23, I didn't feel the same way after I watched this, especially as an educator. Jane, maybe you could put something to words that would come from another direction.
Well, no, I think one of the problems is that when the scripture is presented without any sort of context, then we just take the story as is, as opposed to realizing that one of the purposes of the gospel is as a rhetorical tool to convince you to believe in Jesus. And so one of the ways that you do that, just like at a commercial, you pick what you want to sell against the product that you're saying doesn't do the job. And so then you make that side look really bad, or like you interpret it that way. And whether or not that was originally what was being done, that's how it's these gospels are used to, you better believe in Jesus, otherwise you're going to hell. And so then you read into that the Jesus opponents, and you start to read into that, which is not necessarily true. And when I was saying it reminds me of Peanuts and wah, wah, wah. Those Pharisees could be the grown-ups who don't get what the kids are doing. And so, of course, the kids always feel like the grown-ups are hypocrites and they need to get their comeuppance, and we can't wait for, or if it's the Republicans that are doing that, not the Democrats, or whoever it is. We have these fights with people who are different than we are, who maybe are the people in control, and we're the new people on the block. And so we see all the pit holes and what they're doing and how bad they are. And it's, it's just, when we're not presented any context of that's kind of what's being sought to stir up, at least in cartoons like that, then we take it all at face value. And yeah, it looks so clearly there's good and there's evil, and the Pharisees and the Jewish people are the evil people, and the Christian you can see how that narrative gets created when like Rabbi said, that's probably not at all what the original intention was. And if those Christians who put that text together would see how this has all been interpreted today to really denigrate Jewish people, they would be horrified, I think. So how's that for a nutshell?
Sure,
Going all over the block.
John, go ahead, John.
If I were even a child watching this, but I'm an adult, I was offended by the presentation because the young man or the youth that was doing most of the talking would take a few words, but finish it with all of his own words. Talk about taking things out of context sometimes. You take some true words, 3 or 4 words that are accurately spoken in our historical record in the scripture, but all the others were surrounded so much so that it blurred and twisted things. But also I worked with kids all my life. I think a lot of young kids, if you taught a real class with this attitude, would see right through you, but many would not, and that's sad to me. The prejudices that people have prolonged in many areas in our life, this is right and this is wrong, and if you don't do it my way, get out of here, kind of a thing. When I read the versions of the scripture I have, even though some of them really make me struggle to understand them, I don't get this, to me, hateful attitude that came in this cartoon. I was offended. If my children were watching this in a class, I would pull them out.
Okay. All right. So I hope nobody pulls you out. Anybody pulls anybody else out here for showing it. And please in no way understand that I think that this is all of Christian education. I don't know where this particular one comes from. It's not a question of, in my mind, it's not a question of denomination or even a particular educational staff at a church. It's an example of stuff that is out there. I see. What is the BBC? I don't know. I didn't. Okay. Was there anything else before? I did want to maybe just point out before I forget. You mentioned one of you mentioned the fire on the table there. I don't know. Maybe the connotation is something like Gehenna, right? It's hellish. But to me, I think that's utilizing a rather well-known anti-Semitic trope, which is there's a group of Jews sitting at a table that are making decisions for everybody else, and there's something of the mystery about it. There's something of the ritualistic mystery, the fire there. To me, that's very problematic. That's very reminiscent, I think, of Elders of Zion, for those that know what that is. And I'm not sure they consciously did that in the producing this, but that's a real problem out there. In other words, it's not a huge leap from this to the fact that the Rothschild family, has a space laser, which is creating climate change or hurricanes, which we hear from some corners. We kind of laugh at that, but this is, okay. Anyway, any other things before we go on to the text itself?
I just wanted to clarify in case I was misunderstood. I am in no way objecting to this being shown in our study. I'm talking about if my church provided this in one of their Bible classes for children, I wouldn't leave my child in that class. That's where I'm coming from, because it's not teaching truth.
I understood. I was joking. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at the text itself. And so when I said the format's a little bit different today, is that we skipped to the hatred before the potential hatred before the holiness. Let's go back to the text itself and see how it might be read in a back again fashion, or in a positive fashion for everybody who's present. That's my goal. Perhaps it'll work. Perhaps it won't work. Okay, so so I'm going to flip back and forth now. I'm going to put it on the screen, and maybe I'll just ask Megan if you'll read the first section, the first paragraph from Matthew 12. Just need you to unmute.
Sorry. Okay. Matthew 12. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry, and they began to pluck heads of grain and eat. But when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath." He said to them, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry, and those who were with him, how he entered the house of God and ate the bread of the presence, which it was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priests. Or have you not read in the law how on Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are guiltless? I tell you, something greater than the temple is here. And if you had known what this means, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. But the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath.
Okay, let's try to unpack this a little bit, and we'll go back to our Hollywood Squares mode here. So that let's take the first thing. We need to understand what's wrong with plucking the grain. I was at the church, I don't know, a few months ago, maybe it was in the summer, when we spoke about this passage. My role was to talk of Jesus as the Pharisee, Jesus as the Jew, in your series about who Jesus is in different contexts. And so I apologize if you've heard this before. The Torah doesn't say you're not allowed to work on Shabbat. The Torah says you can't do melacha. Melacha in Hebrew might be best translated as artisan crafts. And so there are very few things that are specifically said you're not allowed to do. One of them is you can't kindle a fire on Shabbat. In other words, you can't carry from one place to another. Those are just examples of things that you cannot do on Shabbat. And it was up to later generations to create a whole system of categories. In fact, 39 different categories that of things that you're not allowed to do. One of the things you're not allowed to do is to reap. Is to cut something from the plant, to take the fruit off of the plant. And while this isn't reaping with bringing in the sheaves kind of a reaping, official reaping, but they are doing the essential thing. So it's at least twice distanced from the term in the Torah which says melacha, artisan craft, which is interpreted as things having to do with farming, like picking the fruit, which was meant, of course, in a professional capacity. Or your livelihood, and then to this case where the disciples are walking and they take some of the grain. This is found in synoptics as well. There's the parallels to this in the other Gospels, but in this one, Matthew adds because they were hungry. Which is an important addition. At least that's why I prefer to teach from this particular example, from this rendition of the story, even though it might even be the latest one, the youngest one, that is the one that came after the others, because this idea that they're hungry, and it's Shabbat. And so then he goes to, well, haven't you heard? And he plays the role of the Pharisee, of the rabbi, understanding, taking one text from here, another text from here, and learning what might be for the case here. Didn't we have the case, he says, of David with his band of marauders that were famished and hungry, and they got to the temple in Nov, and there was no food. They said, "Do you have food? We don't have food. All I have is the showbread." And showbread is reserved for the priests who have to eat it in purity. Those coming from the fields. From the war situation, they're certainly not pure. They have the impurity of death, and they're certainly not. They're not from the priests. They're not kohanim, and so they're not allowed to. And yet he ate it, and there was no criticism of David in that particular story. In other words, the story shows there's exceptions to the rule, especially when you're hungry. And then he says, well, there's another case. Don't you also understand that not only is that's not the only competing value of hunger and keeping the laws of Shabbat, but there's competing values of offering sacrifices in the temple, which mean that you've got to slaughter, one of the things you're not allowed to do on Shabbat. You've got to kindle fire, you're not allowed to do on Shabbat. You've got to skin the animal. All those different things are under the 39 categories, according to the Pharisees, of things you're not allowed to do on Shabbat. And yet, the priests are doing them on Shabbat. Well, there's a rule that they could have said back to Jesus saying, this is what the later Talmud rule says, when you have a case of a positive commandment, that is, burn something on Shabbat, kill this animal on Shabbat, that you have to do in the context of the temple, and you have a negative commandment, which is do not do artisan crafts on Shabbat, the positive commandment always trumps the negative commandment. That's a general rule of the Talmud. But all these things came out, and of course, for the sake of saving a life, the rabbis themselves were very forthright about that. But Jesus is using the same methodology, the same system to say they're hungry people. Really, this is your issue. This is why you're so upset. And then finally ends with, you've missed the point of the prophets. The prophets that said it's not about the ritual, it's not about the strict observance of the letter of the law, it's the spirit of the law, it's the mercy. And in that way, Jesus is saying to the people, we need to emulate God. We need to bestow that mercy, that chesed, as God does in human beings. We need to do the same as emissaries of God. That's how I read this passage. And so I certainly don't read it as and I don't read it as sitting around a table, how are we going to screw this guy? What are we going to do to get him in trouble? There is that, but not in this story at least. And so that's my first way of what I feel is reading it as in the holiness that I believe in this case was the simple meaning of the text, the holiness which is in it, and not going down the hatred road and just staying. We don't have to come back when we stay in the holiness. Questions or comments, reactions to this first paragraph?
Well, I think one of the things that turns that I see what you're saying, Rabbi, but it seems like because I've been reading through the Bible and preaching on it, like as I read the Gospels, every time that story shows up, I think in all four Gospels, and that's the first time that the Jewish leaders, whoever they're called, decide now we've got to kill him. Like that whatever like positive thing is going with that story, the Gospel writer then has used this as the first step of the Jewish leaders bringing Jesus down. So it turns it into, I think, an uglier interpretation, or it seeks to have an uglier interpretation than maybe even originally was presented. So I'll just say that.
Okay. So this and Jane, this addresses what John said, or I think John said about taking things out of context. We all take things out of context. And the context that we have right now, we all know may not have been the context of the way, if it happened, or even the way it was first put down by some guy named Matthew, who wrote this guy, was still trained. So we're constantly playing with the context and the context. So this is not about what was. I'm just clarifying something I've said before. When I speak of this, it's not about what was. This is not what really happened. That's not others might go that direction. I don't go that route of what really happened.
Yeah, my point is more that it's part of if it's the narrative is like, let's see how Jesus ended up on the cross, then these stories are used as it's a narrative tactic. Whether or not it ever happened that way, I don't know, but it's used as a narrative tactic to show Jesus now he's going on his downhill route to get put on the cross.
So that's an interesting conversation I'm glad you left it. Let's keep that on the upper, the thing that, like the CNN thing, that was that called, the ticker tape thing. We should keep this on our mind because, yes, that is how the Gospels appear to culminate with, but not always, but in this case, Matthew, to culminate with the Passion. And so it's all leading up to that. But what if we didn't read the Gospels that way? What if we read instead, and this is far be it from me, a Jew, to tell Christians how to read, but just an idea, what if we read it instead, various episodes that teach us how to be better human beings, and it's not about the fact. In other words, yes, I know that's in the background, we're going to have to deal with it. You'll notice we're pushing that off until Easter time, Ashley, to deal with the Passion narrative. But what if that's not the most important point? As a possibility. Reactions? Go ahead, Patty.
Yeah, well, actually, at the time, it was very common practice not to clean the field like we do here after you harvest. It was left on purpose for the poor to be able to walk through and eat little bits to feed on, especially the tops of the wheat, and get all their protein. And so I think that's your point, is Christ was saying, hey, you're too tight about these laws. This is common. So they're eating on Sunday. They're hungry. Get off their case. And so and that's the compassion and love he was trying to teach them. You're all boggled up with the rules, here you've got hungry people. It happens to be a Sunday or Saturday. So just relax.
So it's interesting you bring that up. Yes, there is the law, and we know that from the book of Ruth, of course, where she's gathering at what's left after what they miss, right? There's three things. You leave the corner of the field open according to the Torah law. You leave the corner uncut. It doesn't specify how big the corner has to be. You've got to leave the corner undone. The sheaves that have fallen down while you're gathering, and the ones you forgot, you missed a spot here or there, you leave them for the poor people. It's interesting in commentaries, what you find here, Patty, is actually in rabbinic commentaries, especially, is that they weren't saying that they were stealing, but not because of the laws of the poor, but because this is not considered to be the law. The Pharisaic laws gave permission for you to eat from the field if you're hungry, even somebody else's field, right? To a small amount to munch on. That's not considered to be theft. It's connected to what you say here, but again, the thing is that it is on Shabbat, and so let's go on to the next story, if we will. So Patty, maybe you'll read for us this next section here that I throw up on the screen. The man with the withered hand. Patty, if you just need to make sure you're unmuted.
It's a little not very black on the screen, so I'll just read it straight from the Bible, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And there was a man there whose hand was withered, and they questioned him, saying, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" That they might accuse him. He said to them, "Who is the man among you who has only one sheep? And if it should fall into a pit on the Sabbath, would he not take hold of it and lift it up? How much more important is a man than a sheep? It is therefore lawful to do good on the Sabbath." Then he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And he stretched out his hand, and it was restored like the other. At the end, it doesn't move up the screen here.
So,
Keep going. And the Pharisees went up and took counsel against him so as to do away with him. That was Jane's point. But Jesus knew of it and departed from thence. And a great many people followed him, and he healed them all. And he charged them not to say where he was.
Okay, I think we're going to hold it at that. Okay, with the part that you read. So again, another example. In this case, it seems like he's being set up, right? That it is being framed in such a way to set up. But and here it's even more from a rabbinic point of view. The problem with healing was not about the actual healing itself. It was because they were afraid, at least in the rabbinic material that we have, that you would grind the medicine into something that you could ingest or digest, and the grinding is what's the problem. The grinding is one of those agricultural things that you're not allowed to do. But instead, it has to do with it sounds more like a metaphysical healing than a physical healing, even though it is a physical healing, but it's something that's not going through science or nature, and we don't have a law against that even, but here it's being told in such a way that, well, look at the Pharisees, they're trying to slip him up, they're trying to see how we might do it. So what does Jesus do instead? Jesus picks on a particular stream of the tradition that talks about the cases you're allowed to help an animal that's fallen into a canal, for instance, and what you're allowed to do. You can't just pick up the animal, but you can put like a certain mattress there so they can climb up themselves. It kind of goes like this, the rabbinic text to explain to you how, and what Jesus is trying to say here, once again, you have more compassion for an animal than you have for a human being, which is not an unruly. It's not, again, there's no evil plotting against the world, controlling the world kind of thing going on here. Your interpretations are too strict, so let's leave it at that. I would say there's a lot to be gained positive through the scene of taking the hand, and there's some rabbinic parallels to that, but that's not for today. So if Rabbi Ofer is listening, I'm thinking about Rabbi Yochanan with his arm, right, in the Talmud, where basically the rabbi says, "Give me your hand if you want. Do you want to continue to be sick, or do you want to get up? So if so, then take my hand, get up." And it's more to do with it's more psychological healing than anything else, and maybe that's implied here as well.
I just wanted to add one more thing, Rabbi.
Sure.
Just some interesting reading that I've done about Jesus' healing stories and the healing stories in Scripture. A historian said, in the ancient world, science was quackery. Like most people that tried to use medicine, it was not, it was considered quackery, and people would die with this equal amount of, if they got treated by that, as if they went to somebody that was exorcising them of their spirit. So people were very suspicious of certain kinds. So it was common for religious people to serve as healers. That was just considered another way that you'd get just as good a chance of getting healed by a spiritual healer as you did by a doctor. And so I just wanted to share that too, that whatever's being argued around, the audience would have it wouldn't have been so weird that a spiritual guy comes and heals somebody to be able to walk.
No, and that's universal, right? That's probably all, at least in the Western culture, and that continues on after the Middle Ages, even in the founder of the Hasidism, Rabbi Yisrael Meir Baal Shem Tov. He's a Baal Shem Tov. He's the master of the good name that signifies he was a healer. There were other healers around, and so charismatic healers.
Yeah, and that they think, if whether or not it has to do with the Jewish argument, but that Jesus has so many healing stories, it was kind of an advertisement too. Like, if you're sick, we can heal you and it's free, and they would charge money to go to a doctor, but it was also like an invitation. If you're sick with something, we can provide healing for you, and it's free. So was another incentive to want to join the Christian sect, which I just again thought was an interesting thing that I never thought about before. So just thought I'd share that.
Okay, so let's go on to the next one. John, you want to read this one for us?
I'm unmuted. Then a blind and dumb demoniac was brought to him, and he healed him, so that the dumb man spoke and saw, and all the people were amazed and said, "Can this be the son of David?" But when the Pharisees heard it, they said, "It is only by Beelzebul, the prince of demons, that this man cast out demons." Knowing their thoughts, he said to them, "Every kingdom divided against itself is laid waste, and no city or house divided against itself will stand. And if Satan cast out Satan, he is divided against himself. How then will his kingdom stand? And if I cast out demons by Beelzebul, by whom do your sons cast them out? Therefore they shall be your judges. But if it is by the Spirit of God that I cast out demons, then the kingdom of God has come upon you. How can one enter a strong man's house and plunder his goods unless he first binds the strong man? Then indeed he may plunder his house. He who is not with me is against me, and he who does not gather with me scatters. Therefore I tell you, every sin and blasphemy will be forgiven men, but the blasphemy against the Spirit will not be forgiven. And whoever says a word against the Son of Man will be forgiven, but whoever speaks against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven, either in this age or in the age to come.
Okay, so now it kind of gets nasty, right? It admittedly gets a little bit nasty, and it feels like Jesus's buttons have been pushed to a certain extent. He's kind of lost patience. If you're not with me, you're against me, and all the things that follow. But the argument that he used leading up to this was an argument of logic. Right? I don't see it as an argument of demagoguery, and I don't see him accusing, in this case, I don't see the Pharisees being accused of being hypocrites or all those horrible things that we saw in the thesaurus. Right? This is more like, I'm working within your system, I'm working within your logic, you're not following your own logic. That's how I see it. How do other people see this particular episode? Is this a section that's read in the lectionary? This Jane? Does this come up much?
I think so. I'm not sure. It's interesting because in the Gospel of Mark, it's not the Pharisees that are accusing him of having a demon, it's his family.
Yeah.
So you get different opponents with this story. And so then he's got to say, my real family, like his line in Mark is, my real family are those people who follow God's will. And that's actually is the version that I think is in the lectionary.
Just a side comment and a little bit of philology here. When he says, you think that I'm Baal Zevul, that's how you would read in here. Baal Zevul. Baal Zevul has a really interesting history because in Book of Kings, in an interaction between Elijah the prophet, and Ahaziah, I don't know how you say it in English, Ahaziah maybe, I don't know. He gets hurt, and he says, well, go call to the prophets of Baal Zevuv, not Baal Zevul, but Baal Zevuv. And Baal Zevuv, if it's translated literally, means the Lord of the Flies. And hence, I think the title of that book, I'm guessing that we all had to read in junior high school or high school, wherever we had to read that horrible book. I mean, it's not a horrible piece of literature, but it's a very disturbing book to read.
Oh, Lord of the Flies.
Lord of the Flies, yeah. And so, so there's different views in how this happened. Really interesting. But Baal Zevul by itself appears in an ancient Canaanite text, pre-Hebrew biblical text, and that would mean the Baal, that is Adon, the Lord, God, just like the Baal that we have in other places. The Baal of the prince Baal, Zevul probably being prince there. But many Bible scholars have posited over the years that it was changed from Baal Zevul to Baal Zevuv, which would be a derogatory way of saying, mispronouncing a name to make it sound worse. The same thing is done with the word Mephibal, is the name from the mouth of Baal. That was changed in our copies of the Hebrew Bible to Mephibosheth, to the embarrassment. So instead of Mephibal, Mephibosheth. And so that's kind of a tendency to happen. So the fact that it comes up here in a negative sense, that Baal Zevul is considered to be a demon, king of the demons here, and yet it doesn't have the Baal Zevul, kind of throws a stick into the spoke here, whatever, or into the wheel. What did you want to say, Jane? You wanted to...
I was going to say that in one of my books on the humor of the Hebrew Bible, the author talks about this in First Kings, where Elijah says, "Oh, you need to go to talk to, you're worshiping Beelzebub. Quick with Beelzebub." I mean, that's the English translation, and meaning Lord of the Flies. And their suggestion was that, it was a satirical term making fun of those who worshipped Baal because they had so many sacrifices. In the Hebrew world, there was you just sacrifice to one God, but if you go to any of these other religions where there's all these other gods, you have to sacrifice, you bring all this meat out on the altar so all these gods can have their meat. It's going to attract all these flies. And so it's almost like, just like poking fun at the ridiculousness of this polytheistic world. So I just thought I'd throw that out.
Thank you. Excellent.
That's what it's thought to me.
Of course, it doesn't really help us with the context here. The context here, we have to...
Something helpful at cocktail parties, if you're like, did you
know?
No.
Yeah, of course. What I just did, we just did the same thing. It's the same.
Right. Exactly.
And because we don't go to...
We're giving you lots, like both how to understand the Bible and then interesting facts at cocktail parties. So
right,
all these sorts of gifts you're getting.
Or in Zoom parties. Yes, Steve.
Well, one of the most famous things I can read in here is that a house divided against itself cannot stand. I've heard that so many times, and I never really correlated it with this particular, reading before. But
let's go, Steve. Let's go back to the context, though, of 2,000 years ago. A house divided cannot stand. So first of all, the reality is, and this is now I am talking about what did happen, is the house was divided not into two groups, but into splintered all over the place, really. And here you have one person, one leader, who becomes afterwards more than that, saying that, well, you're divided from me, you're set aside from me. Well, the Sadducees, who we didn't go into, but they were the aristocrats, not just, but the priestly aristocrats and other wealthy people in Jerusalem, they also have an issue with Jesus, right? There's no fun there. We don't know about the other groups as well. We don't. The truth of the matter is, other than John that just always just says the Jews, the Jews, the Jews. The Pharisees are, at least in Matthew in the other synoptic gospels, well, become the main kind of opposition, right? But there had to have been other opposition as well, just not in the particular areas where Jesus was necessarily maybe he didn't cross paths with. That's why to me it's just so obvious that Jesus was a Pharisee, right? But yeah, so the house divided. And of course, people will say that today, Steve, from a political, I'm going to go back to your original comment today, bringing it up to today's politics. They'll say, a certain curriculum in school is going to bring about more division than it will bring about unity. But of course, the other people say, well, yeah, it's unity if you're in power. You have the power, so you think it's unity. It's you maintaining your power, and that's the kind of thing that I think we'd be wise to look backwards as well. Backwards and now. House divided. Houses are divided, and the question is, what can houses get together on? Not everything, but what can they get together on that might make this world a better place? So if we think in terms of, perhaps now I'm just fantasizing, but if Republicans and Democrats could get really behind this issue of what to do vis-a-vis Russia and Ukraine right now, just to set aside the other stuff, again, it's just a fantasy, maybe we would, to look for, or when we get together, we're doing interfaith study, right? We're sitting down, we're studying, and I and some of the Oramid Bar members will come to church, and you, some of the members of your church will come to Oramid Bar, and so it's not just study, but it's also praying together. But the most common form of interfaith action in this country is to solve a problem, an immediate problem. A hurricane, an earthquake, homelessness, feeding the hungry. Those are the things that are the traditional places where people of different faiths come together, because let's set aside everything else, because we all believe in the sanctity of life. Let's at least do that together. That you find. And then you find in intellectual circles the study together, and now I'm bringing us into that intellectual scholarly circle. What you don't find enough of, in my opinion, enough of doing all three things, of those three pillars, at least from a Jewish point of view, but I think also in many Christian circles as well, of intellectual growth, of spiritual practice, and of fixing the world. And so it's good to fix the world together. It's important, but you need inspiration to be creative about it. You need to learn more about the situation. You've got to study together as well and find those common things. And finally, we need to, I think as people of faith, we want to involve God in this, in that whole aspect of our lives. So there's a plug for three-way interfaith interaction. Okay. Somebody else, please. I'm talking too much today.
I would just add a fourth pillar for what we're doing, and that's watching Coen Brothers movies together. Like, how often do you get to do that? So I'm sort of kidding, Rabbi David.
No, I'm going to say, see, in my Talmudic mind, no, that falls into one of three categories. And either we're seeing a Coen Brothers movie together because we want to learn more, so it's under learning, or because some of us grew up in that background of theater and movies, and that is our religion, right? We want to go and observe in the church of the movies, right? Is that? And the third thing is that we want to give encouragement to these kind of filmmakers to make more movies. So we buy a ticket, we pay the thing. So see, that's the difference between that's why I'm still a Pharisee and you're not.
I'm a something close by, but but that's why it's so much fun.
Okay. All right, then. Anything else, or should we go on to the next section? Okay. Mike, would you like to read this section for us?
Then some of the scribes and the Pharisees said to him, "Teacher, we wish to see a sign from you." But he answered them, An evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign, but no sign shall be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the whale, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The men of Nineveh will arise at the judgment with this generation and condemn it. For they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and behold, something greater than Jonah is here. The queen of the south will arise at the judgment with this generation and condemn it. For she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, something greater than Solomon is here.
Okay, so this is kind of, in my view, when I read this chapter, this is kind of, there's a culmination of Jesus getting a little bit more angry, and then boom, this is where it blows up, you know? No, stupid question. No, you can't. That kind of, you know, it's a little bit difficult here, but it's perfectly normal in this kind of exchange, especially when one side feels that they're using logic and they're using the same methodology, but they keep running into a wall, and then finally you get this kind of blowing up. That, to me, that's the flow of it here. And this is not to say, well, see, so the Pharisees weren't right. Well, Jesus also wasn't right. No, that's not what I'm trying to say here. What I'm trying to say is that for me, this is a very human situation. It's a human situation that has always happened and always will happen, but it doesn't mean the end of the world. It doesn't necessarily mean the end of the world. And this is a favorite section for me to do when it's a three-way interfaith dialogue with Islam, because there are not a lot of materials that are textual materials of biblical characters, and I'm better at narrative prose than I am the poetic parts of the Bible, and law is far more complicated once you get to Christianity. When you're looking for things that are common, one of the easier ways to go is to look for biblical characters, because even if a biblical character is not mentioned in the Quran, in this case Inon or Yinon there's two different names. Bishop Yunan is the Christian Arabic. Is Arabic name for Jonah in Christian circles, Yunan, and Inon. Or am I mixing? Inon is, they're different names. Muslims have different names, but Jonah is in the Quran, and this is one of the few examples that we can take: Hebrew Bible, New Testament, and Quran. Another one, of course, is the binding of Abraham's son. And then also in Islam, you've got a book which is post-Quranic called the Stories of the Prophets, that has a lot of the other prophets with stories in it as well, and so you can keep it in that area. But aside from the 3-day thing, right? The 3 days in the fish and the 3 days coming back, that motif, which isn't really developed a lot here. It's mostly to talk about just things that were in the biblical past that you as rabbis should know, whether it's the story of Jonah, and it's also used as foreshadowing here, or whether it's the Queen of Sheba, right, who comes from such the great queen from the south who respects Solomon. In both cases, I am far greater than this. So the Pharisees don't even answer at this point, right? You notice there's nothing about the Pharisees here. This is kind of going on. Another thing, which is a tendency in real life to do, is when we get in an argument with another side, it stops being a dialogue at some point. And again, I ask forgiveness if I'm speaking too much in anthropomorphic terms when it comes to Jesus. But at some point, you just stop talking with each other and you talk at, and so there's no response. Other comments or reactions? Now this is a passage that I know people do know, because I know that it does come up. But anything you remember from those that read this growing up from younger times? No. Okay, then let's go on to the response. The response of the Pharisees here. We're skipping a few of the verses. Jim, would you like to read? No? No. Okay. Who else we have here? Amy, how about you today? Just unmute for us.
Okay. Oh, this one?
Yeah.
Okay. The rejection of Jesus at Nazareth. And when Jesus had finished these parables, he went away from there, and coming to his own country, he taught them in their synagogue, so that they were astonished and said, "Where did this man get this wisdom and these mighty works? Is not this carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary? And are not his brothers James and Joseph and Simon and Judas? And are not all his sisters with us? Where then did this man get all this?" And they took offense at him. But Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor except to his own country and in his own house." And he did not do many mighty works there because of their unbelief.
Okay, so this kind of shifts the development of the narrative here, I think, to a different stage. It's not. It seems like it's not just the Pharisees. It seems like it's the whole village, right? It's where he's from. But I think that we're meant to learn from this particular passage on what came beforehand as well. What I'm trying to say is that if you thought that the Pharisees would recognize one of their own being really good at what they all do, and they're not, well, it's not necessarily because they have it out in firm or because they're evil, but it's because that's what people do. That's what social frameworks do. Look, even when he went home to his own chevra, to his own people, he was seen. We know this guy. How could he be so? This is, he's the pisher. I remember you when you with the pinching on the cheek kind of a thing, And no, look who's talking now. I remember when I was his 5th grade teacher, and he didn't. Okay, those kinds of things that come up. And the most important part is at the end, and this is real irony from my point of view. Super irony. I grew up in Israel from age 18 until I started to have any exposure to New Testament literature. Wasn't until my late 30s, because I was busy with other parts of life, rabbinic, my late 30s perhaps. And all I knew in Israel the term Ein Navi Be'iro. Not only did I know it, but as I moved on in my rabbinic career, because I kind of led the way a few steps ahead, I say ahead, some people say behind, but of my own movement, the conservative movement in Israel, my own group of rabbis, and especially when it came to advocacy for LGBTQ issues and people, when it came to dialogue or coexistence with Palestinians and then interfaith stuff, and not being accepted, is that people would often say to me, my friends, Ein Navi Be'iro, which is Hebrew for there is no prophet in that prophet's own town, which is the term, the phrase in Hebrew, in modern Hebrew, and perhaps already in medieval Hebrew, but certainly in modern Hebrew, is right out of the New Testament, is out of the Gospel. So that in itself is cool, from my point of view, right? The fact that there are phrases in Hebrew that are used in the state of Israel, that people use them all the time, that are directly from the New Testament, and you can show it in historical dictionaries, show it, and the people that say it are even ultra-Orthodox Jews that have no idea. To me, that's cool. I think there's irony in that I like quite a bit, that I'm sure Jane gets a tickle about as well. But in this case, though, it's kind of like this is not at war with the Pharisees as much as it's explaining, well, this is what happens when you have an innovator or a disruptor, right? And if you don't believe me, all you have to do is look at all the multiple films on Netflix and everything else now about stories of disruptors. And again, I would imagine this is a paragraph that people know quite well. How does this jive or not jive or work with how you've understood it or read it in the past? We need a little bit more participation here, people. I obviously I'm doing something wrong, but we're lagging here. Come on, let's get some input here. Who can I challenge? Nothing? John, go ahead.
I've seen two sides of this in my real life observations. One is exactly that, because you know someone well, you know their family, you know all the times they messed up in their life growing up and getting more wisdom, and it's harder to respect what that person can contribute to the conversation or to what you want to learn, or in this case, to your religious faith and so on. But I've also seen people who, because it was a local person, could see no wrong regardless. Like sports heroes, for instance. I was from a town of 5,000, and Tommy Smith, you may remember 4 world records in 2 months once, but he had the black fist in Mexico Olympics. Tommy was a wonderful person. I sat next to him in classes in high school. He still seemed the same every time he came back. But once he did that, the press especially crucified him outside of town. When he came back, he was treated the same. He was the hero, regardless. He was the one that went to school with my neighbor's kids and all this kind of stuff. But it could have been just the other side. The reviling could have been horrible, because no one's perfect, and they would have known all these little stories.
Got it.
My little district of 4 small schools in no city, in my small district I taught in for almost 4 years, there were teachers there that knew him very well. And of course he had some things that were not positive. He was human.
I've always, oh, sorry. I was just going to say, like, I've always heard this personally, like how my parents, like, I could be, in the eyes of everybody else in the world, the most talented, enlightened, capable pastor in the whole world. But like my dad to this dying day was like, you're not giving my funeral sermon. My pastor's going to give the funeral. Like he had I was still like his kid who was 12 years old, who still needed to be like scolded and it's so annoying. But I get it, like I'm going to refuse to like everybody else, but the people that are too close make your life. Well, I'll just stop right there. I've got plenty of therapy, so I'm fine, thank you.
We probably all have those kinds of stories. Gary, go ahead.
I'm not thinking just about how people become contemptuous of you. It's also that when you're doing things like this, like Jesus was doing, you're training, you're pushing people to change. And if there's anything that will get people against you, it's to threaten the status quo. And so it's not just, he threatens his family with it too, because they'll be tagged with he's part of their family. So the attempt to make change becomes a real barrier for those who might need it, because they're afraid of it, and therefore they're afraid of you.
Good. This I forgot to say, this section we skipped quite a bit. We skipped the huge chunk of parables, and I did that for a reason, because I want to get to this. I didn't want to have too much text, but one of my points in this latter part here, and if we were to do all the parables, that would take a lot of time, is that the parables are right out of the same literary well of rabbinic literature. There are literally the same parallels, some of them the exact same parallels. Same phrases, the same parallels. And it's not to say, well, he stole it from us, we stole it from them, although there is one in which I can actually show, I believe, the parable of the mustard seed, where there's nothing like it in the rabbinic literature until about the 13th century. So 1,000 years, 1,200 years later, in an anthology of rabbinic work, which usually preserves older traditions, in that anthology, there's the parable of the mustard seed that grows into a tree and becomes like a paradise kind of thing. And you look at that. Now, I'm sure the transcriber or the anthologist who brought all those traditions together, I don't think that he did so with his eye on the New Testament. I'm sure it got there through verbal or oral folk traditions, and that kind of stuff happens all the time. But that we all drank from the same well, literary well, is just really clear. And the fact that he's in the synagogue, to me, these are things that are important to teach. in the children's, at the level of children. So if I go back, this was kind of my pedagogy for organizing today's study, to take something which is used for children today, which is about lifting Jesus up high and very calm. Notice how he's very calm. He's also clean. He's clean shaven. That has a lot to do with it as well. He's cooler. He's, as opposed to he's grumbling old man with the long beard, and the fire and everything. That perhaps a better way is to have it, to create these, to thread the beads. I don't know. That's what I'm thinking. With threading all these episodes together in a cartoon like that, is to thread them in the context of a synagogue. If I was working on an educational project, I would suggest the cartoon takes place in the study hall or in the synagogue, where Jesus is called to the Torah, and he reads, and then he talks about that passage, which was from Isaiah or whatever it was, and then says what he says. But it's done on a common basis, not in order to convince the young Christians that they need to go to synagogue. No, that's not what I'm talking about, and not in order to convince the Jewish children, oh, Jesus, what Jesus, the religion that turned into something different is the same as Judaism. No, but to talk a little bit about the commonality, is to emphasize that kind of stuff. And was my goal. Perhaps maybe it won't be in the future, for this particular episode, this particular segment that we're doing today, to really talk about that the Pharisees are not the others. The Pharisees are an aspect of his own organization, his own community, his own family that needed to be called out. And as he called them out, it's not just the men in power. And this I addressed, let's say, to those that saw in the cartoon, oh, it's the people in power and they're hypocrites. And it's not about all those words in the thesaurus that we saw on screen beforehand. It's about natural community dynamics, social dynamics, and to see it in that context. So I'm happy to hear criticism of that, or agreement, or some other anecdotes or stories.
There was one other point that I like reading this book here. I don't know if you can see it. It's George Lamsa, who spoke Aramaic and talked about a lot of the customs in the early Eastern times. And when they mentioned his brothers and sisters, he mentioned that at that time men had many wives. So a lot of the brothers that Jesus had may not have come from Mary. And so there was always antipathy between the brothers of who's jockeying into position, who's favored, etc. And especially at the point of this story is they're thinking, I don't know him, he's not my real brother, he's, from this mother and this and that. And so we always, I think many Christians have been brought up to think it was a nice cohesive family, but there could have been 4 or 5 mothers attached to Joseph with different sons. And so they would have not gotten along and wouldn't have minded saying, don't look at me, I don't have anything to do with this fellow.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I can't help but just be sad, as we study this, understanding the wonderful tradition of haggling, of like wrestling with scripture and having different ideas about it. It's kind of something you enjoy doing. You're coming to the synagogue and everybody's got their ideas and that's what you do, and it makes me sad because that tradition, which I'm guessing is very much embedded in how the Gospels are originally presented, that we've inherited as Christians, this idea that whatever is said, you have to believe it, and if you don't believe what it said, then you're thrown out with the gnashing of teeth. So there's really very little invitation in the Christian tradition to wrestle with the text, to understand like that's what we're invited to do with the Pharisees and with Jesus and with everybody else. And so we miss out on the richness of having these wonderful discussions of different ideas of what things might be, and how that's actually a blessing as opposed to a curse. So that this class has really made me more aware and sadder than that Christians still feel so uncomfortable about having different opinions about anything and in the text, and finding joy in wrestling with different ideas of what it might mean, so just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Yes, Megan, just unmute yourself first.
Let me see how I can say it. I really appreciate how you've educated, Rabbi, the how we've taken New Testament and seen that Jesus was a Pharisee, possibly, and what he said and what he did went along with what other Jews were saying, what other rabbis, what other teachers were saying at that time. And the idea that that argument is part of this, because I don't know too much about the New Testament, and it's making me want to understand it more. But I need to understand it from this historical, how you've woven it together. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
So that I could have. Now, when I show you the next slide, it's going to be. You're all going to say that I arranged this with Megan beforehand. But Megan, you can attest the fact that I didn't tell you anything what to say, right?
Nope.
But take a look at this kind of parting slide for, and we can take comments afterwards. But just because you said this now, I wanted to end with this. This is from the Babylonian Talmud. Now, the Talmud wasn't edited until hundreds of years after, literally hundreds of years after Jesus, but it preserves earlier traditions. And this is a rather early tradition because at least it talks about the times from even before Jesus. So Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, "That which is hidden, and that which is revealed. But in heaven, everything is known. And the great court in heaven will exact payment from those who wear the cloak of the righteous, but are in fact unworthy." Sounds a lot like me to what we did last week, right? To that chapter from Pharisees. But wait, it's even better. King Yanai, right, said to his wife before he died, "Do not be afraid of the Pharisees," in Hebrew, the Prushim, "and neither should you fear from those who are not Pharisees," in this case meaning the Sadducees. Rather, it's not about the party they belong to or the ideology, the ideological title they have. Rather, beware of the hypocrites who appear like Pharisees, as their actions are like the act of the wicked Zimri, and they request a reward like that of the righteous Pinchas, referring to that story in Numbers where Pinchas, the son of Lazar, the son of Aaron, went and shish kebabbed the Zimri and the Midianite woman and the Israelite man who were going at it in the temple. But the language of beware of hypocrites who appear like Pharisees, in other words, this is almost, I don't think that there was a direct contact, although I don't know enough. I'm not a scholar, enough of a scholar of this period of literature to know the relationship. I'm sure others have written on it. Between this particular passage of Talmud and that chapter we did last week about the 7 points against the Pharisees. But it sounds like this was, they were made to be read with each other. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'm just repeating myself over and over again. I apologize. Any other comments? Can I post a source sheet from Sefaria from Rambam on Melacha? I'm not sure. I don't know that this is the right framework to do. This is an answer to AY. Framework to talk about Maimonides and the understanding of what Melacha is. Another time, perhaps when we do this chapter in Matthew, then it pays to go. And it's the same reaction I'm having to the information about the Seder of the Chavurah. I don't want to spread ourselves too thin right now to kind of focus. But if you do look up the word melacha for those that are interested, then you can find more about what I said about the rabbinic. No need to be sorry. I'm just you can find more about rabbinic understanding. Ofer, did you want to say something? Rabbi Ofer.
Yes, hi. It's a pleasure to study with you, David.
I wanted to ask a question, historical question. I know that there is a lot of criticism between the Pharisees against the Kohanim, against the priests in the temple, which really remind the claims or the criticism of Jesus against the Pharisees. Is it from the same time or just later?
So the question is going to be what Rabbi Ofer is asking. Even if what's related, and I'll show you another slide that I didn't think that we would get to today. If there is a conversations, as if it were kivyachol, as if it were conversations between Pharisees and Sadducees in this, or the Samaritans, or who are called the Kutim, or other folks. Does that mean that they come from the same time as the Gospels? In other words, in the first century, or were they written, a few centuries later in retrospect? It's really hard to know. Of course, one way to know when a particular passage was written in the Talmud is the language it was written in. If it's written in Aramaic, for instance, it's usually from a later time. Even though the people were speaking in Aramaic at the time, but in the time of the first few centuries of the Common Era, the writing was done in Hebrew. And so if we have a passage in the Babylonian Talmud where it's Aramaic, and then suddenly there's a section in Hebrew, especially if it's introduced with the words, and this is what was taught, this is the tradition, then we know it's an earlier tradition, right? But we don't have any manuscripts from that time to date it that way. But Ofer, why don't I put this up, and why don't you read from this for us? From this section here, a little bit from the Mishnah of Yadayim, which has to do with the laws of purity and impurity. So when Ofer said before the priests, I think he was referring to the Sadducees, correct? So could you read this for us, Ofer?
I'm sorry, I'm with my phone today, and it's hard for me to read.
I'll read it. Okay. The Sadducees say, "We complain against you, Pharisees, that you say, my ox or donkey, which has done injury, is liable, yet my male or female slave who has done injury is not liable." In other words, an animal is more, you have to pay for an animal's damage, but not for a slave's damage. Now, if in the case of my ox or my donkey, for which I am not responsible if they do not fulfill religious duties, yet I'm responsible for their damages, in the case of my male or female slave, for whom I am responsible to see they fulfill mitzvot, the commandments, how much more so that I should be responsible for their damages. One of the reasons I wasn't going to read this is because it's like Chinese, right? It's like another language, right? Well, this is the intricacies of the laws of damages, and interchanging them with the laws having to do with if you have a slave in your household, which was of course allowed, as we know, are you responsible for them performing the commandments, to living a full Jewish life according to the Pharisees? And so it's not so much about the details, but this kind of these scholarly, as if, I'm not sure the way this happened, but these scholarly debates about the minutiae, fine points of the law. And I'll let Ofer answer afterwards. We'll just finish this. So they said to them, "No. If you agree about my ox or my donkey, which you have no understanding, can you deduce from there anything concerning my male or female slave, which you do have understanding? So that if I were to anger either of them, and they would go and burn another one's stack, should I be liable for make restitution?" All right, so that's one episode of back and forth. Another one is a Galilean heretic. We don't know exactly which group, but I'm sure there were many different groups to choose from. "I complain against you, Pharisees, that you write the name of the ruler and the name of Moses together on a divorce document." Okay. The rule, in other words, it's not just Moses that we're doing this in the tradition of Moses, but they also wrote the name of Caesar, whoever the governor was, whatever that was probably because that was the law. You had to go along with the law of the land, the Roman law. The Pharisees said, "We complain against you, you Galilean heretic, that you write the name of the ruler together with the divine name on a single page of Torah, and furthermore that you write the name of the ruler above the divine name below." What they're referring to, I don't know. I don't know if anybody knows, but it's like, oh, you're going to criticize that, I'm going to criticize you in that. And it's kind of back and forth in almost a childish way. As it is said, and Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord who I shall hearken to his voice and let Israel go?" But when he was smitten, what did he say? Yeah, when he finally got it, the Lord is righteous. And what is that implying in an argument? So I brought this because it's kind of a snapshot from the Mishnah, which was edited the year 200, reflecting oral traditions beforehand, could very well be from the same time. So in answer to your question, Ofer, yeah, I guess so, more or less from the same period. But what does that, but what does that tell us, and how much were these texts worked on? Ofer, I know you know, but the others know that we may have a corpus called the Mishnah, which was edited around the year 200 in northern Israel, in the Galilee, but we have specific cases where, for instance, a whole section was added at the end of one of the tractates. It was added later on from another time because somebody said, wait a minute, we should put this in as well, which is not from that time. And then we have parallel traditions in the Talmud, which were passed down orally, that are sometimes contradicting that's what's in the Mishnah. So it's a bit of a mess. But what we get out of it is that even, this is my main point for this ending part of our study today, my main point is that this kind of rhetoric was happening in the house itself, the different parts of that house that was divided in any case, and we lived with it. The Jewish tradition is not just Pharisaic. Others were absorbed into the Pharisaic tradition, and it's not just Pharisaic ideology, that's changed. And then when we came to the modern period of the 19th century, then Reform Judaism, and that gave birth to Conservative Judaism, that was a reaction to that, which gave birth to Reconstructionist Judaism, which was a reaction to that. And then the hippie Judaism from the 60s became its own kind of denomination, Renewal Judaism. And if we're smart and we're wise, we'll recognize that the house is indeed divided, but we can find the common things that will propel us forward in those things which are most important to us as a group. And that would include Christians and Jews and Muslims and Hindus and Zoroastrians and anybody else. But it takes a lot of work. It doesn't come easy. You gotta sit down, you have to open up the book, you gotta follow. There's a process that needs to go through. Pastor Jane, wind us up here.
Other thing I was thinking of as you introduced about how the word Pharisee has come to have a really negative when it wasn't. It's kind of the same way we use the word Philistine. The word Philistine anymore means somebody that's kind of a boorish, rude person. But it's just, they were another opponent, whatever in the Bible. But that word has come to be, or even pagan. We say, oh, they're pagans. That must mean they're Satan worshipers. Well, pagan originally just meant you were a nature worshiper. You were one of the people that was living in the furthest part of the rural area. You're kind of a country bumpkin. And when the Christians were trying to convert everybody, they would go into the cities first. The country bumpkins were the last people to be converted. So then suddenly that name, those people they got called something, or that word came in to have a much more heinous meaning than what it was originally. So I just always think that's really interesting, how the name calling that we do about the evil people, or how those words have come to have those meanings. And it's
a good example from our world, that is from Rabbi Ofer's world more than mine, is he is ordained as a Reform rabbi, but ordained in Israel. And Israel, the Israeli Reform movement is called Yahadut Mitkademet, which means progressive Judaism, and it's part of a world movement, the World Movement for Progressive Judaism. And when I was first at Temple Isaiah, and I said something about progressive Judaism, and one of the members went berserk. He stopped coming. Why is the rabbi bringing politics into this? Hello, there's a lot of words in the English language we can use different ways. So progressive is an issue, and liberal, you say liberal. So so I think all of us, Rabbi Jane, Pastor Jane, I think words of wisdom for all of us is to maybe language counts on one hand. We have to be careful, but let's also, when it's used towards us, let's also allow for And from now on, if somebody calls any of you a Pharisee, you can say, Rabbi Lazar says that's a good thing.
Thank you very much. That's right.
Okay, my friend.
Right, yeah. So,
all right, we'll see you next week, okay?
Sounds terrific. Thank you, Rabbi. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, thanks.